Okay, this is about my 19th attempt to start this video, and I'm running out of time. So we are going to blow through this in one take. And there will be ums, and there will be ahs, and there will be dead air, and there will be parts where I'm fiddling around trying to find an image. We're just going to go for it. So anyway, there are a ton of videos out on YouTube with really good expert advice on how to shoot fashion weeks. This is not one of them. This is a video that is an extremely deep dive into what happened when I went out to shoot Fashion Week. So I've got 25 images here that I want to go through in probably about half an hour. And take away from this what you will, but if nothing else, if you are interested in trying to sign up for the same program that I did, follow me on Instagram, send me a message. I'll send you my point of contact, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about how to try to get in on the same thing. So what's a show look like? Let's talk about geography and terms first here. I've obviously spent a lot of time putting this presentation together. So this image will tell you that this is backstage, where the models are getting ready with costumes and makeup, walking around to where the production assistant stands, who will send them out onto the runway to walk, down to the photographer pit. They will present for a moment, turn, walk back, walk out, and so on. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like in actual images. So this is image number 1. Now you're going to see, first of all, this is not taken from the pit, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But it gives you a really good idea of what it looks like from the side. You can clearly see that this is the background. This is the door through which the models walk. The production assistant we talked about, sometimes they will come out a little further than they think that they are. They think they're invisible to the pit photographers, but they're visible to you from the flanks. So when you're checking your background when you're shooting, keep an eye out for them. The next photo here is of the other end of the runway. So this is a model who's come down to the end of the runway, and look where her eyes are. Her eyes are directly in line with this black area here. That's the photographer pit. Don't worry about this here. We're going to cover that in a minute. But that's where her eyes are focused. That's where her pose is focused. So some models might pay attention to the people over here, but every model is going to be paying attention to what's going on in the pit. Okay, so I had never shot Fashion Week before. I'd shot a couple of fashion shows before. The first one was in Las Vegas. Frankly, it was a COVID show. People were just getting vaccinations, were just getting back into things. So it was people doing their best. But you go to your first show, you'll learn a lot. The second show I shot was in New Orleans. The first one in Vegas was in a warehouse. This one was actually at a hotel, hotel by the river. Much higher production value, lots of people in the crowd. You'll learn a lot. I would suggest anybody who's thinking about going to shoot Fashion Week, go shoot 2, 3, maybe 4 local fashion shows. They're always looking for photographers, especially the ones that are volunteering. And even just getting used to the pressure and the protocol and what gear works and what doesn't is worth every penny before you actually get to the big league, so to speak. How did I get invited to New York Fashion Week? Well, basically I saw an ad on Instagram, and it said, "Would you like to come shoot New York Fashion Week?" And I said to hell with it. So I submitted my contact information to my portfolio. And 3 days later, I am absolutely shocked when I get a message back saying, "You've been accepted." Because if somebody says, "We're going to put you in New York Fashion Week" on Instagram, the first thought is obviously that this is a scam. However, I did my research. The company was legitimate. I had talked to another couple people who have been to shoot the same thing. They told me it was a go. So I went ahead, booked my flight, booked my Airbnb. But the one thing that they made clear, or was clear to me eventually, is that we would not be shooting from the pit. We would be shooting from what I'm going to call the flanks. The areas out here that, while not the prime real estate of being in the pit, Frankly, I found them a lot more interesting because if you put a bunch of top level photographers with top level gear into a very small area in the photographer pit, you know what you're going to get? Probably a lot of images that look exactly the same. What was nice about shooting from the flanks was that you could go ahead and get a lot more emotion, a lot more action, a lot more crowd reactions. So my pass that I got was good for two 4-hour slots. The deal was that I could shoot, I could edit, I could send in my edits, and hopefully the production company would go ahead and post them to their Instagram account. So basically, I was working for free, but you know what the hell, I'm in the room, so I'm not going to complain. The first thing, probably what everybody does, you get on YouTube and you start binge watching the videos about how to shoot Fashion Week. Did that. I also found it very interesting to watch the view, not just from the photographer's point of view, but to watch the videos that were done by the models about what it's like for them to go through New York Fashion Week, or really any Fashion Week, because that gave you a lot of ideas to what was going on in the background. So when I got to New York, the first thing I did was I went to B&H Photo. If you haven't been to B&H Photo, frankly, it's kind of like Disneyland for photographers. It's every piece of gear you've ever imagined, like almost an entire square city block. Picked up a couple of extra batteries and a couple of the little knickknacks that I knew that I would need for the show. You get to the show. And frankly, like I said, I had shot in a warehouse. I had shot in a hotel ballroom, but I was not prepared for what I was going to see at the at Sony Hall in Midtown Manhattan. It was fantastic. It was this huge room about 3 levels underground that had been completely modernized, original Art Deco, huge AV setup. It was unreal. So let's pull up a video here that I shot and walk through just a couple. So you see here, this is where I am in the flanks. This is VIP seating, which is where they put us. These people are actually sitting on the top of the VIP seats. And as you roll, you can see here, I saw a lot of this. It was people with tripods, with huge cameras, with giant phones on top of them. The only thing it was designed to do, I think, was to make sure nobody behind them could actually see what the hell they were shooting. This was the runway itself. So you see here, this is the photographer pit. You can tell because that's a big camera up there where they're actually recording video. These are all the photographers in the pit. They're already in position because they're fighting for and elbowing for space. The overflow crowd, like I was, they're sort of filtering in when they can. If we play this a little bit longer, you can see just how complex the lighting setup is. You can see the start of the billboard and the runway. And you can see this is the seating for the people actually paying guests who haven't rolled in yet. At one point, we actually got to shoot from down here. So we got to shoot very close to where the action was. What was everyone like? Everyone has this vision of what photography at New York at a Fashion Week is going to be. Frankly, it was a zoo. So this is a reverse shot from the first night I shot from by the billboard. You can see over here, that's the pit that we talked about earlier, and this is the overflow. This was the day before the event really started. When I got there on the first real day of shooting, I'd say there were probably 150 to 200 photographers in the overflow pits, all with the same level pass I had. My guess would be 70% of them were shooting Sony. The quality of the gear varied a lot. The guy I sat with for a lot of the show, he was shooting at a Alpha 6300, which is a crop sensor from 2016, and he seemed to be getting great results. So the quality of the gear didn't matter that much. I didn't see any telephoto lenses. I didn't see anybody going out beyond what looked to be about 200 millimeters. About half the people were using their primary cameras to shoot stills. The other half were using them to shoot videos. A lot of people, like I keep harping about, had these huge rigs where they would bolt their iPhone on top of their camera, and it just looked kind of ridiculous. You maybe 10% of them had mini tripods or monopods. I'll talk about monopods more in a minute. I was wearing photographer gear, so black polo, black slacks, black tennis shoes so I could get around. The rest of the people there were mainly, I call it street casual. We're not talking ripped jeans, but we're not talking creased pants either. 95% of the people I hung out with on the flanks and the overflow were super cool. 5% of them were looking for a reason to be offended by somebody, so we basically kind of rolled our eyes at them and avoided them as much as possible. For the gear, I was shooting a Sony A7R5. I had my Tamron 70 to 180. We'll talk about that focal length a little bit further on. In general, I settled for to shoot at 1/250th, ISO 400, f3.5. I was really concerned watching some of the other videos that the lighting conditions would vary wildly from one show to another. Frankly, the colors varied a little bit, but the brightness of the show didn't seem to vary, so that was a huge relief. First thing I did once I got those settings is I made sure to lock those settings in, because I know when you get excited, when it gets energetic, you squeeze your camera and you're gonna accidentally wind up changing the shutter speed or the aperture or the ISO. So locking in the setting was one of the best things I did. The other thing that was important to me, I had set up on my display, was the remaining battery life, number of shots left on those cards, how full the buffer was, so I knew when I had to slow down on my shooting, and also the horizontal level, so that when I shot, I wouldn't have to crop out a huge amount of the image because to get it to level. I did have my monopod, and it proved largely useless. I also had a special mount to go on the monopod so I could rotate from horizontal to vertical, largely useless. I did bring my backpack. That's what I used to get from the Airbnb to the event. When I got settled in, the backpack went into the corner where it wasn't in anybody's way. The only thing I had with me was my body, my lens. I had a very, very small hip pack that had six batteries in it, lens wipes, all of my SD cards in case I needed to swap out, and I also had a little Ziploc bag so I could throw out the trash, like the empty batteries and the used lens wipes, and get them out of the way so I wouldn't be reaching for them by accident when things got busy. Some of the photographers, they actually brought their laptops so they could back up and edit between shows. Frankly, I didn't think that was necessary. But the one thing I did do, because there was a ton of dead time, and we'll talk about that later, was I actually sat down and learned how to use the diopter, which, and I'm probably mispronouncing it, is the correction in your viewfinder for people that wear glasses. And I was amazed at how much easier that made shooting, because I didn't have to wear my glasses when I was shooting through the viewfinder. So if you have a diopter on your camera, bust out your manual right now, go learn how to use it. Position. I was there for 2 days, and I shot from a total of 4 different positions. The main consideration for me was, and this was not shooting from the pit, was line of sight. And I got fooled more than once. And I saw a lot of other people got fooled as well. When you are picking your position between shows, when you come in and you set up, you think you have a great line of sight. And then the show starts, and the person in front of you who you thought was going to shoot sitting down stands up. Or they bring their camera up to eye level with their big contraption blocking your line of sight. So keep an eye on that. When you are in the back, like you can see the people here in the very, very back who are standing up or actually sitting on the backs of seats. When you are in the back, altitude is everything. Some of the people, some of the veterans that I was there and I was talking to, they actually had these little foldable step stools that gave them about 11 inches of height and folded down to about the size of a piece of paper. These were amazing. If you're going to shoot, get one of these things, because from what I could see, they were totally worth it. When I was in the back, the only real use I found for my monopod the entire time I was there was when I was in the back. I want you to picture your monopod fully extended, full height, and you are looking up at your camera with the tilt screen flipped out because you can't see what you're shooting. You can only look up at your camera and see what it's focusing on, and you're just hoping that you get something. Getting a good spot. Get there early. Frankly, these people, the people that I got the passes from, they were not rigidly enforcing shoot times, so I would kind of roll in a little early to get a better spot. Sometimes security would come by, and if there was an open spot, if they didn't have enough people who had bought tickets, they'd let us move forward. If they suddenly needed those tables, they would move us back, and that could be pretty ruthless. I got caught out at one point. Um, a lot of people will sit there, and when a photographer gets up and leaves, the next photographer will come in and try and move into that better position. Be very certain that that person is actually leaving that position. I saw more than once a photographer get up, appear to leave, another photographer come up to take that space, and then the person that guy was sitting with would say, "No, he's just in the bathroom." And you turn around and your spot is gone because you gave it up thinking you were going to get a better spot. Monopods. The problem with the monopods I found is that the monopod pivots around one position where it's hitting the ground. If you are trying to shoot up and down the runway, and you are having to pivot around that pivot point, so to speak, and you can't do that because you're packed in so tightly. So if you are in the back and you're basically shooting a long shot, monopods are great. But if you're closer up front, forget about it. It's not going to do you any good. Um, the shows. The shows are supposed to start at the top of the hour, whatever the schedule says. But frankly, the schedule falls apart after the first show. That's just how fashion is. With this event, each show was supposed to start at the top of the hour. It ran maybe 15, 20 minutes, so you'd have 45 minutes of downtime between shows. Um, when you get there, find a group of people who look trustworthy, who will watch your gear, who will watch your space. A lot of chit chatting between shows, a lot of networking. You might want to bring some people were not wearing branded merchandise, but you might want to go ahead and make it clear that you've got a hat or something that you set on the table in front of you so people who aren't talking to you can see who you are. Um, Between shows, also, the models from the previous show would go into the hallway, or excuse me, into the stairwell that took you up the 3 floors to street level and would shoot with photographers there. What I found was that most of those models seemed to have prearranged the photographers with the designers, so I didn't get involved in that. Um, Eventually, you get a 10-minute warning. They'll tell you to get into your seats. The bumper music will start. It's been 4 months since Fashion Week, and I still cannot get the bumper music out of my head. It's horrifying. And the lights will go down. The lights will go down in 10 minutes, and that's when the chaos starts. Uh, First of all, 70% of the stuff that you're going to see at Fashion Week is ridiculous and completely unwearable. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not cool and it's not worthwhile. This is one of my favorite shots. Clearly, this is not something that somebody's going to wear to Olive Garden, but just the workmanship and the creativity and the way the light caught the diamonds and the look in her eye. This was one of my favorite shots of the whole event. Um, but let's be honest, a lot of the stuff was crap. If you're not there being paid by somebody to photograph their stuff, or you're not being paid there to photograph on behalf of an outlet, if you have a designer that's setting up stuff that you don't care about, don't waste your energy. Sit down, relax, look around, see what other photographers are doing, learn from them. Don't waste the shutter counts. Don't waste the space on your SD cards. You're just going to toss all those photos out anyway, so just save yourself the time and effort. Um, it's also going to be very obvious when these shows starts which designers have spent a lot of time thinking about their presentation and which ones are just kind of phoning it in. For instance, these girls right here. I wish I had video of this. This troop of girls, these models were amazing. One of them would walk out, and as one of them was coming out, the next one was come out, and as they would meet halfway back through, they would stop, spin back to back, which is what you see here, do a couple of more routines, and at one point they had like 4 of them interacting on stage. I'd never seen anything like it. The photographers were going nuts about it. They had clearly spent hours choreographing this. Um, and then other was just walked out like they're looking for their Uber driver. So, in any event, but these were right here. These were probably the best produced shows that I saw the entire weekend. You're going to see a lot of hype groups. The hype groups are the performers that the designer will send out during the show in order to get the crowd hyped up about the presentation. Frankly, they're almost uniformly a pain in the ass, and not for the reasons that you think. For instance, this girl came out, and as you can see, she's 6 inches off of the runway because she's jumping. She went nonstop for 7, maybe 8 minutes while they were presenting. And the problem is that she was so much better than the models and the outfits that I wound up not shooting any of that. I just kept shooting her. Good or bad, they're in the way. You're going to have to shoot around them. And so I just wish people would stop doing this. Okay, I'm putting this up here because this was just crazy. This was someone in a mask who came out at the start of the hippie samurai presentation and stood in this spot the entire time. In fact, you can see right here the designer is starting to come out at the start of the show. So she came out. So all the photographers are wondering, well, when is she going to do something? You know, when's that mask going to come off? When she's going to pull out a samurai sword? And she just stood there. And we were enthralled because it was so cool. And we just sat there. And I don't think I got a shot of anything else the entire time she was out there because I was just waiting for them to do something. And when they finally finished, he came around, he collected this person, and they walked off the stage. And frankly, it was like a murder mystery where they don't reveal the name of the murderer. It was amazing, but I felt so let down at the end of it. In general, if you have a choice of shows to shoot, the better shows tend to be later in the evening, maybe 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the better shows tended to be on Friday and Saturday. So keep that in mind if you have a choice of slots. That was my experience. Okay, the models, actually taking photos. The first thing I tried to do with each model as they came through that backstage wall was to get a feel for what kind of model they were going to be. The first kind I called those the walkers. Those were the models that came out, they walked straight down to the photographer pit, posed, turned around, and walked right back. The second group were what I called the posers. They would walk down, they would stop halfway through, and they'd stop and they'd look left and they'd look right and they'd pose, and then they would walk down. A little more interesting. And then you had the third group, which I called the cheerleaders. And these were the fun ones. For instance, this girl here, when she walked out, the show clearly became 100% about her. People were going nuts because she had her hands in the hair, she had her hands in the air, soaking up the energy. This girl here walked down the entire stage with her eyes closed, with her hands up, directing the crowd energy. They were impressive. They were certainly more interesting. The reason, I don't think it has anything to do with the models. I think it's what the designers want. I guess some of them want the walkers just so the clothes show out more. Others want more of the hype because that's what gets the crowd going. But I tended to look at the first model because that would tell me what I would get from every other model coming out from that designer. I tried to shoot every model in front of their logo. And this was not because I was offset, this was not as easy as it sounded because of the way that the angles worked. But the biggest problem I saw was that the designers had logos that were so big and so abstract, you almost couldn't get a shot of them unless you were dead center at the end of the photographer pit. So this was an attempt, but it normally didn't work. As the models would walk down, you'd have to change your focal length to keep them in frame. I would shoot probably half of them horizontal, half of them vertical. The vertical in order to get the outfit, the horizontal to try to get the entire environment. The biggest problem, the hardest problem, the most murderous problem was getting them when their feet were down, because it is apparently a large thing among runway photographers is to shoot images where the model has the lead foot completely planted. That is a shitload harder than you think. Because if you look here, and this was another girl who was hyping the crowd up. In fact, I think she had friends in the audience. But you notice her first foot is completely in the air. And here's the problem. If you are trying to count the footsteps as the model walks down the runway, The problem is that she will pause occasionally to acknowledge the crowd, which will throw off your count. She may also vary her pace intentionally or unintentionally, which throws off your count. You're also running into the fact that as you're shooting this, there is enormously loud bump music being pumped into the room. And try as you might, I kept going from counting the model's footsteps to counting the music beat, which was a problem. If you get that all figured out, I wound up with a process where I would go strike, strike, strike whenever the model's foot hit the ground. The problem with that is that if you've ever been in marching band or you've been in the military and you've learned how to march, the cadence counts when your foot hits, not when your foot is flat. So what I wound up having to do was go strike, plant, to give myself a half second between when the heel would come down and when the foot would be fully planted. Once I learned to do that, the shots got a hell of a lot better. So that is my advice. It will require practice. If you can find a model who wants to practice her runway walk while you practice photographing her and getting her planting, that would save you a lot of time. Other problem I ran into, eye autofocus. I'm shooting Sony. The autofocus is fantastic, but frankly, on some of these models, it just didn't work. There was so much makeup. The eyelashes were so extended, and sometimes the headgear was so bizarre that the eye autofocus simply ceased to work, and it would start jumping to audience members in the background. I wish I had known a lot more about how to activate tracking focus before I shot this, because I'd never had to use that before. But don't rely on eye focus to save you every time. The other problem is, remember, if you're shooting from the pit, like we talked about earlier, every shot, the entire thing is laid out so you get perfect shots without distractions. You don't have the lights dropping down in the background. You don't have the offset of the stage. You basically don't really see people. You're just shooting straight down the runway. If you're shooting like this, you got a lot of people in the background. And so as you're searching for distractions, you're also searching for people who either aren't photogenic, aren't paying attention, are milling about, anything that's going to go ahead and distract from that image. So, you can see here, this is pretty okay. People are paying attention. They got their cameras out. She's interacting out with the crowd. There were a lot of people that I shot in the background who were just bored looking at their phones, and it killed the shots. The other problem is, since you're shooting off focus, I'm shooting off center, you get a lot of background distractions. For instance, here, big light, exit sign, little exit sign. This could have been a great shot. That dress is fantastic, very classy. She's got it together, her facial expression, amazing jewelry, but there is no way to easily crop this image or edit it so it doesn't look like this. If I shot this maybe 3 seconds earlier, 2 steps earlier, 3 seconds, and got her back here, I could have cropped out these two bright lights and got her back here. It would have been a great shot. And that's what you're doing. It is fast moving because you've got to go ahead and you've got to process this all in your head simultaneously. Sometimes, and another reason why you go ahead and evaluate the models as they're walking down, as they first come out, is you want to know who's going to do something. Sorry, let's go back to this shot. This is hands down my favorite shot. The model is, let's just say, determined looking. She's in the lights, but I actually moved to get this shot. I got the rear lights to almost do a halo effect. I wish I'd gotten it a little bit. I wish I'd stood a little bit lower to get the light totally behind her head. But I got this shot. It actually lit up her hair. So I love this shot. It's my favorite one up on my Instagram page. Also, some of the models would do interesting things. Like this one here was a dress spin. I knew she was going to do something as soon as she came out because I was tracking. I was looking to see what kind of model she was, what kind of design, what kind of show the designer wanted to put on as soon as she walked out on stage. After the models walk, what you'll get is you will get, I call this a parade. I'm sure there's a technical word for it. This is where all the models come out again in their outfits. These were really tough to get correctly because the models never seemed to be spaced in such a way that I could get them in frame either all at once or break them up. So I think there's a line, and I think these two are supposed to have a longer gap because they've got trains to their outfits, but she's a little bit behind, or perhaps she's a little bit ahead. So it was impo- so I couldn't crop it like this because I'd get half of her, and I couldn't. There was just no way to crop this shot. In fact, the only reason I saved it was to show this problem. Um, this is another one where she might be a step behind or a step ahead. Is there's just this glaring kind of gap here, which just sticks out to me like a sore thumb. So when you're shooting these on the fly, try to compose it so that you actually get. So I could have shot this like this, and I could have shot them an eighth of a second earlier and gotten that logo right down the middle, but I didn't. And that's a missed shot. After they finish their parade out and they've all done their final whatever, they'll come up and they'll form their group. I loved these shots, and this is square. This is for Instagram. The other shot's landscape, so it actually looks a lot better. I got this because all the models were there. They all knew their positions. They all had their fierce face on. This model was actually looking at the photographers, so that made that great. So I loved this. This is when you can get it. This is when one of the few times when they're going to be standing almost still, so you can actually really take a second and think about how you want to compose the shot. After they finish that, what will happen is the designer will come out, and this is the designer here. Is he will come out. Generally, the designer will not be doing anything terribly interesting, but sometimes you're going to want to get that shot so you can send it to him because, well, frankly, it's good for his Instagram and it's good for his PR and something to put up on his wall and such. Um, Between the shows is really just a matter of routine. The show ends, the lights come up, the background music comes in, and you got to have a checklist of what you're going to do. Go ahead and check your battery. Make sure if you have to swap batteries, if you have to swap SD cards, wipe down your lens, put your cap on your lens, turn your camera off. Uh, Walk around and actually take some footage of the place too. You can get it's very easy. It's very easy on these shows to get totally focused on what's going on stage, and when there's nothing going on stage, you don't bother to turn around and see what's going on behind you because that's where the best stuff is. But there is stuff going on between shows. Sometimes the event organizers, I loved this shot. They actually sent a ballerina out, and I shot this, but they decided for ambiance to make it basically pitch black. So I had to push the raw file as far as I possibly could to get it to look like this. But yeah, there is stuff that's going on between the shows. And I'm more of an editorial. I like telling stories and such. I like this shot because it's the guy who comes out between the shows. He's completely silhouetted, so you don't know who he is, and his job is to basically mop up the floor. So it's not a glamorous job. It's not an interesting job, but it's definitely a necessary job. So there are stories to be told even at a fashion show. So when you get out, it's exhausting. I mean, you're there 4 hours. It's going to be an hour from your Airbnb to the show and back, plus 4 hours, plus whatever. You're exhausted. Whatever you do when you get home, start dumping your SD cards, start charging your batteries. Because if you make a mistake and take a nap or a shower or go out to get something to eat, you're going to wake up the next morning and realize you don't have enough time to handle any of those things. Not a positive feeling. I shot about 12,000 images. 12,500, I think, was the count. I don't know if that was too many or if that was about right. I think that was probably what most people were doing. A lot of the images I shot was because I was trying to get the foot plant, not necessarily because it was super interesting compared to anything else that was there. So you're going to do a cull down. You're not going to edit 12,500 photos. First thing I looked at, is it in focus? Models are moving. Is it in focus? Is it focused on the right point? Second thing, are there good color contrasts? Somebody in a blue dress against a blue hype wall does not stand out. And the nice thing about these digital hype walls is that they change very frequently. I mean, the colors will change every 3 to 5 seconds, the color will change. So you can take the blue on blue shot, but don't stop watching because there might be a blue dress on red background shot that's going to be available in a couple of seconds. Like I said, distracting backgrounds, exit lights, signs, people. Some of those can go ahead and just kill a shot. The foot strike. Um, what I learned from watching another video is that their hands are not blocking any part of the outfit, so that you can actually see, so that people can actually see the outfit. The lay of the clothes is good. I don't mean to shame this guy, but you got big jacket bulge. This should probably come down. So this is what I was looking at when I decided what to keep and what not to keep. I like models, strong expressions and poses. When I did my first cull, I got down to 600 images, which means I killed 95% of the images that I took on this shoot, which was kind of painful. I'm going to pull up a chart here. This is of the roughly 600 I took. This is the technical the developer settings. So you can see at the edge here, we got 49 images taken at 180 millimeters. These were the static shots where the models were just coming out. And yeah, I wish I had had a 70 to 200. I think I probably could have gone a little deeper into this. You'll see here, this I think is where I was getting a feel for the model and what they were going to do. Hardly any images out here. And then it kind of slowly trickles up. And this is where they're down at the photographer pit at the end. I never felt like I needed to back any further out than 70 millimeters. I think 70 to 200 really was the sweet spot. If you have two cameras, or if you're in the pit, maybe you need a 24 to 70 as well. Don't worry too much about these numbers. These were when I was shooting speed bursts, and I kept probably too many photos where I shot speed bursts of spins and falls and that sort of thing. Shutter speed, I thought 1/250th locked it in pretty well. It gave me enough light. Probably could have shot faster. Maybe could have gone ahead and turned up the ISO a little bit. Aperture I thought was good. I didn't feel like I had to go all the way down on the ISO. Don't pay attention to this. This is something I shot in the dark for specifically for somebody. So that's a throwaway. And I believe these were tests. But I thought the 400 was good. Didn't give me any noise that I couldn't deal with. And then I liked, like I said, I'm more of an editorial photographer. So I did 415 in landscape. Of what I selected were 415 landscape, because I thought that the landscapes were more interesting because they showed you what was actually going on in the show. And I think I said earlier that the portraits were more for just emphasizing the outfits without any sort of context. As far as editing, not going to go too deep into editing. The biggest thing I found was get it as level as possible. That's why I shot with the level on the display, so that when I went ahead and leveled it in editing, I wouldn't have to toss a lot of pixels. Crop to what's important. On the color balance, it's a fashion show under crazy lights. I would go ahead and tell Lightroom to adjust to the color of the model's eyes, and then I'd warm it up a couple of degrees. That normally works. I didn't worry about color balance. There's no way you're going to get that right. The more you bring up the shadows, the more you show of the ambiance of the show. I would add a little texture to the outfits. Linear gradients were great for taking care of the lights that were in the background that had blown out the model's face. And I didn't edit the models at all. I figured they're perfect. They're exactly as the designers wanted to send them out. So a couple of things. Number one, bigger cards. I was shooting 256 gigabyte SD cards. They were good enough for a show, but I wish I'd had 1 terabyte cards so I wouldn't have had to keep track of which show was on which card. So I think that's what I'm going to do next time. I didn't worry about, people say, well, you got to keep fully hydrated. Fully hydrated is code word for I got to go to the bathroom halfway through the show. So I didn't worry about that. The temperatures are terrible. When they set the temperatures in these places, they set them as if they're fully occupied during the show. And the show, it gets really warm in there. When everybody pulls out and it's just the photographers left over, it gets really cold. Bring a windbreaker, something like that, because I guarantee no matter where you are, there's going to be an air conditioning event right next to you. I don't care what anybody says, there's not going to be any internet access. Just assume so. Don't make it part of your workflow. If you're in town anyway to shoot, remember that there were a ton of models that were also in town to shoot, or rather were also in town to walk for that show. If they didn't make the show, you want to shoot in town, there's going to be a lot of models that are looking to pick up to break even on their expenses, travel, food, that sort of thing. Just because you're shooting the runway doesn't mean you can't shoot a bunch of other stuff. And also, just talk to the other photographers. Like I said, 95 of them were super cool. And it turns out when you talk to them, they all had almost the same exact instincts from show to show that I did. The good shows, the bad shows, the important things. We talked about settings. So don't sit there hunkered down. Talk to them because you will learn. In any event, if you are interested in shooting something like this, follow us on Instagram, Bad Choice Media. Send me a message. I will go ahead and I will let you know how I got into the show. Maybe it'll work for you. Maybe it wouldn't. The program I was in apparently is still running. I'm not going back for February 2025, but I am going back for September 2025. But yeah, send me a message and I'll send you the contact information I had. I'll send you the form letters they sent me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Any event, sorry for the ums and ahs, but sometimes you just got to get stuff out, and I don't have that much time to edit. So we're going to go ahead and post this thing up, and hopefully everybody will learn something. Thanks.